And now, 5:59. Oh, it's the moment you were all waiting for. Oh, let's introduce you our district director, Gerald Moniks. The stage is yours. Applause.
Thank you very much indeed, Guy. Thank you for the introduction and always your great hospitality and your Italian welcome that you give us. Yeah, much appreciated. Welcome, Toastmasters of District 71 and many from other parts of the Toastmasters world also. We are very privileged to have our incoming region advisor for Region 10, Mr. Francesco Fedele. So we give him a big warm welcome, Francesco, wishing you every happiness in Region 10, and we will be appreciating all the support that you'll be giving our district into the coming year. Now, the main feature of our evening session of seminar is that we are honored to have Morag Mathieson. Morag is second vice president of Toastmasters International. So indeed, we are very honored, and I'm sure our ears will be glued to the voice of Morag this evening when she'll be delivering a speech to us, Lessons from Servant Leadership. So it's my privilege, and on behalf of all the members, Morag, you're very, very welcome to our district seminar. Now, just to introduce Morag to our meeting, I'd hand over to our Public Relations Manager, Elizabeth Jordan. Elizabeth, can you come on board for that, please? Thank you.
Regional Advisor, all the special guests, fellow Toastmasters, it is always an honor to introduce our guests at our Sunday webinars. Morag, you have a special warm welcome because we know you're from Scotland, so you're sort of coming home to D71. So yes, so you get an extra special welcome for that. Morag, we know, is a distinguished Toastmaster. She sits on the board of TI, and most significantly, she's the second vice president. And for those of us who do a little bit of mathematics, we know that in 2024, I think you will be the international president in the centenary year of Toastmasters. So it's going to be very special for Toastmasters, very special for you, and special for all of us. So we've got great things, great expectations of you in that year. Maura, by background, is a pharmacist. She's a scientist, so welcome to that club. Great interest in continuing professional development, which she used with the pharmacist and which she continues today in her work as a consultant. She's also a mentor to people doing MBA, to MBA students, and the chair of a charity for children in Germany. Her track record for leadership is well known, both in Europe and in Africa, EMEA, and of course, we know because it's propelled her from club right up to the main board. And we are extremely privileged tonight to have her share with us some lessons from servant leadership. So with that in mind, Morag, it's a pleasure to hand over to you to talk to us about lessons, to share with us lessons from servant leadership. Over to you, Morag.
Thank you very much for the warm welcome and the invitation to share with you this evening some of my experiences and some lessons learned from servant leadership roles that I've had, and tonight focusing particularly on roles in Toastmasters. But before I say any more, I want to hear from you. When you hear that phrase, servant leadership, what image does it conjure up in your mind, or how does it make you feel? And I would invite you to post your response to that question in the chat. And Sue, who's our chat master tonight, is going to read out some of those responses for us. So what does servant leadership make you think of, or what image does it conjure up in your mind?
Right, they're coming in now. So the first image I've got on the screen, Morag, is an inverted pyramid. And then I've got, like Prince Charles, Martin Luther King, service in leadership, giving back, at the service of others, being there for the team. You put yourself first before yourself. I read that one out wrong. But you should put yourself first before others. But somebody here has put, you put others first before yourself. No power. If service is beneath you, leadership is beyond you. Help others. Empower. Putting your team's needs first.
That's great. Thank you, Sue. And thank you everyone who posted in the chat. So it's fair to say on our call today, we actually have some people who have opinions and perhaps even knowledge or experience themselves of servant leadership. Let me share with you one of my experiences. When I was the district director of District 59, my team and I had a line printed on our business cards just under our title. So my business card read, it had my name, and then it said District Director, serving District 59, Continental Europe. At the end of our term of working together, one of my team came to me and said, I never liked having that line on my business cards because it makes me think that we look weak. We're leaders. How can we look weak? That was a shock to me because I saw in servant leadership a strength. And tonight I'm going to share with you some of the ways in which I see that strength and some of the pointers that I would give to those of you who are perhaps thinking about a step in servant leadership in the organisation or thinking about what does servant leadership mean for you. We all have different impressions of what it means to us. And servant leadership itself is really a timeless concept, although the phrase was only coined about 50 years ago by Robert K. Greenleaf. And this is what he said about it. He said that servant leadership is a philosophy and a set of practices that enriches the lives of individuals, builds better organizations, and ultimately creates a more just and caring world. I don't know about you, but that sounds good to me. That's a combination that I'd want to have of helping people, helping organizations, and living in a better world. The servant leader, as we've heard in some of your thoughts, is a servant first before they are a leader. It begins with a natural feeling, a desire to help in some way or to serve in some way. And then comes a conscious choice that you actually want to lead. You have an aspiration in leadership. And that's quite different to the person who puts leadership first. Often that person has a need for power in a way that the servant leader has a need to help or a desire to help. But a leader first and a servant first are two extremes of a continuum, and most of us would fall somewhere along that line rather than being extremely at one end of the other. But the biggest difference between the two is seen in how that servant leader or the servant first leader makes sure that people are being served. So that's the best test, is do you see your people growing? Are your people becoming wiser, more autonomous, more likely themselves to step up and be servant leaders? Then if that's the answer to that is yes, you're probably a servant leader. When I think of my first leadership role in Toastmasters, I'd been a member for about a year and a half at that point, when the club president and the vice president education came to me and said, Morag, would you be willing to be our vice president education? And I asked them, what does that involve? And they explained to me that if I was willing to do this role, I would get to organise the meetings and plan the agendas and help our club by doing that. And of course, I loved my club meetings. I loved being part of it, fully engaged in all the life of the club. I just hadn't served as an officer before then. So that was appealing to me, that I would want to help my club. And I served that year as Vice President Education. And during the course of the year, something happens. And hopefully those of you who've served in leadership in Toastmasters will recognise this. You start to notice, that's a way I could make that better. And as I help that person, I see them growing. So I'm more motivated to help more people. And you start to imagine a future. So you're building a vision as a leader. You're building a desire to make a difference. And then as president that next year, then I was making that conscious choice to lead the club, to set the tone, and to support the team so that we could have a great experience all together. Someone said it in the chat that servant leadership is often like the inverted pyramid, where the servant leader is focusing on the growth and well-being of the people, those at the top of the pyramid, and focusing on the groups that those people belong to. So then the club that members are part of. And depending on where your role fits in the pyramid, who is immediately above you and what you're thinking about. But ultimately, you're serving that top line in the inverted pyramid. And as a servant leader, you're sharing power across the whole structure, putting the needs of others first and helping people to perform at their very best. So what can I tell you about what I've learned in all of this experience? Well, the first thing I tell you is to know your why, because the essence of servant leadership, I believe, is connected to our purpose, or what we see as our purpose, or our motives, our interactions with each other, and our concern for the wider community. So we need to know, most fundamentally, what is our why? What is our motive? And depending on what our motive is, that might lead us to helpful or unhelpful behaviour. And you've probably seen those people who have joined and taken a position because they want to get close to leadership. And it might be perhaps not a very demanding position, but somehow or other it places them close to where they perceive power sits. And they've done that because they're seeking favour. For some other people, it's about promoting themselves or their business or their book or their idea or whatever it is. But, the organisation is so much bigger than all of that. But as leaders, if we are going to consciously lead, we need to understand our motives, and we need to challenge our motives when we're tempted, because we are always tempted. You get opportunities all the time to do things that serve your own motives, or perhaps would be easier if you did one thing than the other. So you need to understand what your motives are so that you are able to function. And, asking yourself that question, why do we do what we do? And if I stepped into that leadership role, why would I be doing what that role would be asking me to do? For me personally, I have a passion to see people grow and develop, and to see people do things they never imagined they could, no matter where they are in the world and no matter where they started from, just that you are simply putting one foot in front of the other in your growth. And that's a big motivator for me. So when I step into roles, that's a part of my motive question is, am I able to fulfill that purpose in life that I have for myself if I take this role? And sometimes we have to get a bit creative about how we do that, but at least to look for it. It's also good if you're working with a team to find out what their purpose is and their why is. And building on that idea of purpose, it's important to know the identity of your team and yourself. Self-awareness is often a beginning point in leadership. Who am I as a leader? What do I stand for? How do I like to work? Because you're asking other people to interact with you. And if you don't know who you are, how are they going to know who you are? They'll probably judge you on your worst behavior, which is not helpful for anyone, rather than being able to support your best behavior, which is what we all would seek to bring, I believe. When I served as district director, one of the things I did with my team right at the beginning of that term was a values exercise. And it's an exercise that I often do with teams that I'm going to be with for a while. And it's where I have a list of about 30, I think about 30 values in total. And I will ask the team, each person individually, to pick out their top 5 values. And then to share them and explain why. And then we look at what are the values that the team have in common and what are the values that are really divergent from everybody. Because that makes a huge difference. It makes a difference in how they are going to interact with each other. And it makes a difference to you as the leader of the team to understand the needs of your team and what they will place importance on. And in my case, I remember doing this exercise with the team, not my own team that I led as district director, but the team that followed me. And I remember one of that team was a club growth director. And his top value of all was achievement. And then alongside that was another member of the team whose top value was harmony. And that's an interesting mix. And as a leader, you need to know that, because one just wants the team to be happy, not really worried if we make any goals. And the other one is goal driven. So as a leader, how do you bring all of that together? And it's easier to do when you understand the makeup of your team and their identity. And sometimes when I've seen teams struggle, it's because they haven't gone through, not necessarily that exercise, but any kind of exercise in that area of understanding their team. And so they struggle with who they are in interactions because they don't know who they are and who they'll be together. Building on identity, I think for any servant leader, trust is a must. Having a foundation of trust is absolutely critical for your people to feel safe. Trust leads to greater collaboration. It allows your team to take risks. If I take a risk and I fail, and I think you're going to talk about me behind my back, or you're going to call me out in front of everyone, you can bet your boots I won't take a risk again. But if I think you'll help me understand why it didn't work, and we'll find a way to make it work next time, or I'll promise that I won't do it again, then I will trust you. And then I will take risks. And it's through those risks often that innovation comes and new ideas come into a team. Trust is also one of the hardest things to regain once it's broken. I think one of the most powerful things that I feel about trust is that within a team, if you can build a bridge of trust within a team that can withstand the weight of truth, then you achieve a position of extreme functionality in a team. You can really build amazing things there. Because that culture of trust, and where I can be completely honest with you, I'm not going to hide my mistakes and hope you don't find them. I'm going to show you where the bodies are buried. We need clear communication if we are to build that trust, and transparency, sharing the good news and the bad news. So when things are going well and you're going to achieve their goals, or when things are going terribly, then sharing it is really important. I remember was also in my district director year. We were having a really difficult time with family at home. And my father-in-law was very ill at the time, and I didn't quite know how we were going to manage everything. And trying not to let that interfere and trying to be the swan where everything was on the surface okay. And then deciding, you know, this is silly. You have a team for a reason. This is a time to trust your team. And having to go to them and show that vulnerable side of me that says, do you know, life is tough right now because my family, we're having struggles. We have got a sick family member at home, and I'm not sure I can carry out all of the things that I'm supposed to. And my number 2 and number 3 immediately said, go and be with your family. That's what we're here for. They weren't trying to interfere or do the work before. But when I needed them and when I was able to be open with them, they were able to say, let us take this. And I was able to place my trust in them as leaders. Also, I think a part of this is sharing the vision that you have, being open about it so people know what is it we're trying to do. Rather than just giving people a task in your team, I think part of that servant leadership piece is bringing your people into your vision so that the vision belongs to all of you together and they get the why that's in your head as well as their own why. And you work together towards things that are common and things that you'll make progress with. And then my final word on trust on this point is that as a leader, you have to show that you can be trusted. So what will you do when your team share a secret with you or something very personal? How will you make sure that they know because they know that you can be trusted? Central to servant leadership is this, as we saw at the very beginning, is this helping people to grow in some way. And I think when we understand the power of building a great team, we also begin to understand the need to develop the next generation of leaders. And the quote, I love this quote from Henry Mintzberg, leadership, like swimming, cannot be learned by reading about it. There is so much of what we do in leadership, whether it's servant leadership, traditional leadership, or any other kind, that is about doing. It's about learning from each other. It's about being willing to answer questions and explain, why did you make that decision? Why are we doing it this way? Being willing to let people see your thinking. It might also be mentoring people, but just because you're the leader of a team doesn't mean you have to be everyone's mentor. Sometimes people need a different mentor to you, someone that they can ask parallel questions of. I remember when I was program quality director in my district, having a mentor who was someone that was completely different to me. He was called Benjamin, and he had life values that are quite different to mine. And he became my mentor. You know, it was one of the best things that could ever have happened to me, because when I had those moments when people did things that make you go, are they crazy? How can they do this? And you want to have that rant about something that's happened. And I believe you have those moments too. I know I have those moments. I could go to Benjamin and say, if this happened, what would you do? How do you see this? And Benjamin would give me his perspective. And then I'd be quiet because I'd realize, these crazy people are not as crazy as I thought. It's just a different viewpoint. And that year with Benjamin as my mentor was probably one of the most transforming times of my life in really opening up my thinking. It grew me enormously as a person by just being able to have those conversations with someone who was so different to me in their outlook. But we grow people in other ways too. You know, when you travel somewhere on a journey and you take someone with you in the car, or you go together on the train with someone, think of all those conversations you have and how that changes people. And I'm thinking of a particular journey, and Margaret Jankowski is in this call tonight, and Margaret might remember this, but Margaret and I travelled many times together for Toastmasters. We travelled to Brussels with 2 other people, 6 hours in the car, and we taught Toastmasters the whole way there and the whole way back after a whole weekend of Toastmasters. It was an incredible experience because I learned so much. I was that little sponge soaking up everything from these much more experienced Toastmasters. I think of another car journey with Margaret where we planned an advanced club that has actually just celebrated its 8th anniversary this month. So they're just incredible opportunities. You know, who will you take with you on a journey? How will you open yourself to questions that people might learn from you? And to remember that people never stop learning. So even if you've got someone in your team who seems quite old and quite mature in their outlook and you think, oh, they're not going to learn, be prepared. They will and can learn from you and from others in the team. Right now on the board of directors, we have a book club that meets once a month. And so board members gather and discuss a book that we've been reading for the month. So last month's book was all about accountability. This month's book is Brené Brown's Dare to Lead. So we read all kinds of things that maybe bring us new insights or just challenges in some way, and people see it in different ways. They're great opportunities to learn. So be about growing your people. Me and we. Servant leadership, as we've seen, is about sharing power, and it's about decision making that includes your team in the conversation and the consultation, because that's likely to bring you greater success. And most of the time, that means that when we're engaged in servant leadership, it's about we rather than me. It's about consultation and discussion, collaboration. It's about saying, let's go instead of go. It's inclusive language and inclusive action. But sometimes it still has to be about me. Because when you are the leader, excuse me, when you are the leader, the buck stops with you. And that's something that you can't reject. When the results are not happening or things are going wrong, as a leader, it's not up to you to look at your team and say, what are they doing wrong? But it's up to you to look in the mirror and say, how could I make this different? What is my part in all of this? And to take ownership of the situations. Some things come to you because you hold a particular office. So the district director, so I know we have your current district director, Gerald Moniks, with us, and your immediate past, John Cox. I'm sure they, like every past leader, will have had those situations where the email comes to you because you are the district director, and somehow or other you have to find a way through that problem. And those are just simply me moments rather than we moments. And they don't go away. So you have to deal with them. You don't really have a choice unless you want to be on that hamster wheel of the same issue, the same complaint, coming back again and again. I think one thing, and this is playing back to the comment at the beginning about serving is weak. Servant leaders are most definitely not doormats. While we are serving people, it is not the case that they can simply walk all over us. Remember that one of our core values is respect. And as we give respect, we should also expect to receive it. And that means that there are things that are not acceptable. There are things that we cannot and should not walk past. But we can choose what those are. Also, it's important for us to have boundaries for our own good. A habit that I started when I was district director was having Saturdays off. And I still try to do that as much as I can, although yesterday I was visiting a district in the US, so I didn't have Saturday off, but I usually try to have Saturday off. And for me, that means I won't open my email. It means that if you call me, of course, I'll speak to you. Or if we make an arrangement to meet or to speak, I will do that. But I will do my utmost to keep that day clear so that it's a day I spend with my family, with my friends. It's a day when I perhaps sleep late or spend more time walking the dog or in the garden or just enjoying life. Because for me, that's a boundary I need. I need some space. It doesn't mean I will never do anything on Saturday, because of course many district conferences are Saturdays, but it does mean that I know I need time to recharge my batteries, and that's good for everyone. So I think we need to set some parameters for our own good, as well as the good of our team, of course. The final point I'd share with you is the importance of accountability. And by accountability, I mean the capacity of one person to hold another to account for the delivery of their promises. So, will you do what you said you will do? Accountability in any team always starts at the top. So as the leader of that team, then, you need to be walking the talk with accountability, because you're ultimately responsible for the success of your team. Whether that is your club, whether it is a district, whether it's a committee in a district, whatever it is that you are that servant leader, you are ultimately accountable. And there are different ways we might show that. And this is on screen, you'll see the accountability ladder, this idea of people expressing themselves as powerless. And as you move through the ladder to a position of being powerful, where we move from that being unaware or unconscious, unaware of the impact of what is happening. And we go through this, it's not my fault, nothing to do with me. Oh, well, I was tired, I just couldn't. I thought it would get better. So I thought I would just wait. I was hoping it would all work out. And hope is not a very good strategy. Taking ownership and being accountable is a much better strategy. When we acknowledge the reality of our situations and we began to look for ways to solve it. One of the ways you can show accountability, I think, in servant leadership is when we produce reports. So when you come to your district council meeting in a few weeks and you listen to the team there delivering their reports, are they going to talk about, I don't know what they're going to talk about, but maybe they're going to talk about what they said they would do and how they've done. I remember being president of a club called Frankly Speaking in Nuremberg. And at the beginning of the year with the team, we set out a plan for the year. We had all of these goals that we wanted to achieve. And on the last meeting of the year, I went back to that plan, and as president, I presented it and said, here's what we did do, and here's what we didn't do, and here's why. And here are my recommendations to the next team based on this experience. And there was something very refreshing about that, being open and honest with the whole club and having to stand there and say, you wanted us to run 2 workshops and we didn't manage either of them. I'm sorry we didn't. And here's why, and here's how we could overcome this in the future. Also with accountability, I had a really interesting experience when I was district director with my division directors. So at the beginning of the year, we asked all of the area and division directors to complete their success plans and to present to the district executive committee their goals for the year. And as they spoke, I wrote down beside each division how many clubs they said they were going to charter that year. We came to mid-year training in February, beginning of February. We were in Nice in the south of France. And the division directors, were all getting ready to present their reports again. And the first one presented, and I said, you told us back at the beginning of the year that you were going to charter 5 new clubs this year. How's that going? He'd forgotten to include it in his report, and his face fell. And he said, I thought you might have forgotten about that. Well, it wasn't my goal. It was his goal. And the rest of the division directors had the same kind of thought of, oh yeah, that's right. I set that goal. I wasn't holding them to account for something that I'd set. That would have been unreasonable. but I was holding them to account for something they had said they would do. And that was a good moment. We weren't waiting to the end of the year. We were halfway through. We were at a point where they could say, you know, that's not realistic anymore, Morag. We have to change that. Or they could say, oh, I'd forgotten that. Yeah, we'll put in place the strategies and we will do what we said we would do. I want to close with a little story. This is a ship on the Red Sea of Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. And you'll see a great big red arrow, hopefully, pointing to two people, myself and Lance Miller, the world champion of public speaking on this ship. When I was region advisor, I went to Saudi Arabia for a visit. And we arrived for the district conference and they had over 500 people coming. And as we arrived at the venue, government officials showed up and said, you don't have the right permits, you can't hold your conference, you have to send everyone home. And Lance and I just looked at each other and thought, well, what happens next? Because I was female, I was not allowed to be part of the negotiations with the government officials. And that conversation took place without me. I couldn't get there to support the leaders. I had to stand outside. And that was really hard for me as a leader. And I wasn't quite sure how they would cope with this. This picture was taken on the very next day. That leadership team got messages to everyone who hadn't arrived. They divided the work and they said, we're going to let everyone know, if you haven't travelled, don't come now because it's not happening. But we have many people who are already here. We've got to do something with them. So they hired a ship and they took us sailing on the Red Sea and they invited Lance to deliver his keynote and me. Thankfully, I got to speak before him, so I didn't have that intimidation of speaking after him. And they ran an amazing event. And, you know, they took us for 2 days of traveling around and trying to recreate special moments for us. Not once in all of that time did I hear those leaders say, it's your fault, it's his fault. There was no fault, there was no blame. There was simply, we have a problem. We need to resolve it. And they did. And they created one of the most memorable visits I ever had anywhere, not just because I ended up sharing a stage with Lance Miller in the middle of the sea, but because of how they took care of us and those very, very special memories. And for me, this is a great example of servant leadership at work. We're planning something, we're working on something, a curved ball comes. We can't wait and blame each other. We have to act. Let's do something that we can do together. Something that builds people up, something that opens an opportunity for us to have a different kind of experience. And then let's work out after this how we make sure that this never happens again, so that we can actually do what we originally planned to do before. I think those are all of the things I would want to share with you today. As I thought about lessons from servant leadership for you today, I realized that there are so many, because it's an enormous topic. Any topic that deals with the development of people is a huge topic because there are many facets to it. But I hope in this time we have together that I've been able to share with you just some of my thoughts and ideas about the lessons that I have learned by walking this journey of servant leadership. And I hand back to our moderator for the evening.
Thank you, Morag. That was splendid. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite one or two people that have some questions. So I'm going to call upon, if you could keep your hand up, because I think some hands have gone down that were up. Bear with me just a moment. I'm going to call upon Elizabeth because I know you've got some questions there, Elizabeth. So can you unmute yourself and ask Morag your question?
Yes, I'm delighted to ask Morag some questions, but I think there were one or two people who had their hands up before me, but I'm happy to go first.
Yeah, the hands have gone down, so I can't see who it was. So
I think you have to say to people who, when they put their hands up as emojis, keep the emoji hand up. Don't put them and take them down. Okay. So first of all, I'll start with the question. Morag, I want to thank you heartily for this wonderful, wonderful presentation. What struck me is that we do a lot of training in Toastmasters, but some of the more subtle and nuanced examples you gave, I think requires extra training at the sort of things that we do at COT. Things like, building trust, doing exercises, that core values exercises. What would you say about integrating those more into our training? Because it strikes me we need to do that.
I think training has to begin with the end in mind. What is it you want people to do? And therefore, where do you need to start? And not everyone needs the same things. So what are the things in common that will build your team up? So things like the core values exercise is a great thing to do with a smaller team, or perhaps to have your division teams together with their area directors, or an area team together, in those smaller groupings. You can do those things. I've done those in COT trainings before. I think soft skills are so important today that we need to find ways to build them into your training. And some districts have taken the attitude of providing additional trainings, more than the COT, for those who are interested. But I think all training has to begin with the end in mind. What is it you want your leaders to be able to do or to know?
thank you, Elizabeth. So do I have any more hands for our guest speaker? Everyone's being a bit shy today.
That's okay.
Well, I have a question for you, Morag, while our guests are thinking about their question. You mentioned earlier in your speech that you ask everybody in your team what their 5 core values are and why. So I'm going to pose that question to you this evening so you can share that with us.
Okay, this is interesting. One of my core values is integrity, because I think that is so important. And if our integrity is breached in some way, then it's a very hard road to recovery, both personally and reputation-wise, credibility-wise. So that's really important to me. A second value that I have that is so important is fairness. And I'm not always reminded of that as a value until something unfair happens. And then I kind of feel my inner tiger rise up, and I think I have to say something about that or do something about that. It led me into a little bit of trouble in Bethlehem, but that's another story for another day, perhaps, where I was almost arrested by police for speaking up about fairness. And also, so that's 2. A third core value from me is simplicity. Why do we make things more complicated than they have to be? Let's be simple so that we can understand and be clear. A fourth core value for me personally is courage. I think people need to have courage. And that's quite a complex value and maybe way beyond this evening, but really matters to me. And then my 5th core value is excellence. I'm always looking for how could this be better? And that's not a judgment on whoever's done it before at all. It's simply that I believe that's what life is. Life is a quest for excellence. And so however small, it's all those tiny things that improve things, isn't it, sometimes?
Fantastic. Thank you, Morag. I see that Philip Khan had his hand up. So Philip, would you come on and unmute yourself?
I've unmuted myself, but may I first correct you? My name is Khan Pani.
Oh, thank you. I got the name completely wrong. Thank you.
My question is this. You're talking about setting objectives and so on. How do you reconcile the objectives that you set for your own team or your whatever region, whichever sector you're leading in, with the apparent objectives of Toastmasters International? For example, when Pathways was introduced, there was a lot of controversy in discussion groups and so on about not just Pathways itself, but why was it set up in the way that it was? And what were the problems? What was the thinking behind the thing that was set up? Why was it not? Why was there not the right kind of consultation with the rank and file and so forth? So there's bound to be, isn't there? Bound to be some sort of divergence in views between what appears to be coming from Toastmasters International and what is the situation on the ground. How would you reconcile those conflicting objectives?
So what you're talking about with Pathways, I don't hear that as objectives. I know that when Pathways was being developed, there was consultation, having led a club that was one of the consulted clubs. And there were 240 learning masters from the members around the world who were part of that development process. And the clubs were the testing process, the club that I was part of, where we did programs. So I don't necessarily see Pathways as an objective in that respect. If we're talking about what often comes up with objectives are DCP, that's often a thing that comes up with, what you might have aspirations of if you're a club president, or if you're an area director who's wanting to put pressure on a club sometimes, that would often come up. And I think there you have to work out what matters within the club. So my home club, apart from the first year when it chartered in January and that year was distinguished, has been President's Distinguished ever since. And the club, it's part of the club culture to say, how will we be President's Distinguished this year? Not will we be? And we've never had a president who challenged that because it's part of our culture. But there's another club that I'm part of, an advanced club, where we said, if we are never distinguished, it's okay. Because we know that our battle, and maybe I shouldn't be saying this, but with my position, but it's the truth. We said, if we're never distinguished, it's okay. Because the battle in an advanced club, when you're an advanced club, at that point, we were a little island of 4 clubs and the nearest clubs from us were 200 miles away. So it's okay because our battle will be for membership. However, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't achieve goals in our programme. And it doesn't mean we're going to work on other things. We'll still work on goals. But we accept as a club that we might never be. And in our 8 years, we've been distinguished twice. And that's a bit of a result in that respect.
Thank you, Morag. I do have another question for you, and I think we've got time for one more. Sean Ryan, you had your hand up, so I'm going to bring you on. If you can unmute yourself and ask Morag your question, that would be awesome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sue. And thank you very much, Morag, for giving us a very fascinating presentation about servant leadership. And I've worked in the corporate world. I've worked in different types of organizations. So I've been used to a specific type of leadership styles. And I'm sure all of us who have worked in professional lives, we've come across these different styles. And what I'm wondering, Morag, is that certainly when I joined Toastmasters, I started to learn about a new way of leadership that I hadn't really experienced, and certainly certain leadership. I came to learn about that. Can you give us maybe some advice about how we can seek out role models to learn how to do servant leadership?
That's an interesting question. So,
did you hear the last bit? How we have role models of how to do servant leadership.
So I think some of the role models out there are people who are writing about it today. And, that's a place to start. So what are they writing about? Where are the organizations they are seeing this? And who's talking about it? So where is it being discussed? And that's a way to start becoming more informed and more aware of who is there. The other part of it is, who do you see? You know, who do you see around you who is actually doing this? And then to have that conversation with them about whatever it is you want to know, how you want to be inspired, informed, guided, whatever it is you have. So I think it's the two things. It's the who in your circle around you in different places, who is doing this that you could see and you'd be willing to look at what they do, or it's also, you know, those people who are writing about it. And it comes up sometimes in other things. So Ken Blanchard wrote a lot about it. And there's been a number of discussions with him and Simon Sinek talking about this. And in particular, Simon Sinek is including some of that in some of his writings, although there are topics that he names differently, he refers to it. And so you start to get a picture of that, the bigger world of servant leadership, where you might see role models of how they're behaving.
Excellent, Morag. Thank you for that. I'm going to bring Gaia on now because I think she's got a question for you. So over to you, Gaia.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you, Morag. I really enjoy your suggestions for leadership. I have a question for you. I was intrigued when you talk about Saturday completely off. I thought that was a fantastic idea, but I know in the reality it's not so easy to just force yourself to be off. So what are your tips and tricks for time management? How could you force yourself to be off on a Saturday basis, please? Thank you, Maura.
So this comes back to knowing yourself. You know, what do you need? What do you actually need? And what is your time like? We all have different schedules and availability. So sometimes I know that my Saturdays will be crazy. So yesterday I had a club meeting that started at 10:30 in the morning. And then I was on a district visit that finished at 5 o'clock this morning. So I had a very long Saturday yesterday and really, really busy and was definitely not off. And I can do that occasionally, but I know that I need that breathing space. And I know for the good of the relationships in my life, I need to have a bit more time. So you have to look at your own life and understand, what do you need as a person and what will your schedule allow? There's someone I know who talks about dividing your week into 21 blocks and looking at how you fill those 21 blocks with work, with other activities you have. And his viewpoint is that on a regular basis, 3 of those blocks should be downtime. And downtime could be going out with friends to do something. It could be walking, exercising. It could be reading for yourself, going to a movie. It could be anything that isn't work, that isn't putting demands on you, that allows you to make more of the relationships that are in your life, those kind of rich things, and to build those 3 blocks into your week every week. Everyone can stand the odd week when it doesn't look like that and when you don't have any time to yourself. But if you're doing that on a regular basis, then you're going to head for some kind of exhaustion of one sort or another, whether it's physical, mental exhaustion, whether it's relationship exhaustion, whether it's motivation that goes, whatever. But you do need to take care of yourself, but you have to make it work for you, whatever that looks like. But Saturday works for me, except in contest season, that gets a little bit difficult when you want to be there to support people in contests or you're competing yourself.
Thank you, Maura. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Morag. Thank you, Gaia, for your question. Do we have any more questions for Morag? Oh, yeah, I've just seen...
Marion here, I have one.
Oh, we now have 2 questions.
It's very brief. It's not actually a question.
All right.
But Morag, what I find helps very much. We're in the middle of contest season and I wouldn't even tell you how mad the last few days have been. But for me, I have a to-do time, but I also have a to-be time.
Yeah.
And I think that's the secret. And whatever that to be is, whether it's a walk, whether it's just sitting with your book. But I think to get the balance, even in this time for all of us, we have to put in a to be time every day for ourselves. So it's just a little tip to share.
Thanks, Marion. That is a great way to describe it, to be rather than to do.
Thank you, Morag. Thank you, Marion, for your suggestion. And I'm just going to bring Francesco on. So Francesco, can you unmute yourself and ask Morag your question? Thank you.
Uh-oh.
Morag, this is the time when in a club we start looking around for people to put in the XCOM, and people start disappearing. It's, at least in some of my clubs, not so easy to find people who are willing to take on servant leadership because they feel, oh, it's a lot of work, it's really heavy, and I do not want to do it. How can we sell it? How can we show the benefits of it inside the club, possibly?
Yeah, it comes back to how you understand that role. So if I take my example of my first leadership role being as VP Education, I have a choice of looking at that as a heck of a lot of work. When I took over that role, one of the things they said to me was, we have a spreadsheet, don't worry. That spreadsheet had over 100 columns and was completely unmanageable. And I struggled with it for a few weeks and then thought, I'm starting a new spreadsheet. That was before we had Easy Speak. And, there are so many tools out there to help us. So if we focus on the work, then who wants to do it? Most of us are busy enough that we don't want the work. So it's understanding the why behind it, isn't it? It's understanding what is the difference that this role can make and what your contribution will be if you make that role. How will you contribute to the success of your club? And it brings us right back to that servant leadership principle of making a difference to people. So how does doing the tasks of that role help other people to become better and help your club or your district to become better? What's the contribution?
Thank you, Morag. That's amazing. That's all we have time for today. We have enjoyed your presentation and your Q&A session. That's wonderful. So I'm now going to hand you over to our Programme Quality Director, Daniel Sanders, to give his appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Morag. That's been a truly inspiring speech you've given us tonight, judging by the questions we've had in chat and my own copious notes. I had to change my block of paper to keep up with you at one point. So it's absolutely superb. And there is so much to take out of this. It's been so good of you to share it with us. I particularly was fascinated that the very first foundation stone of your leadership path that will take you to international president, was that simple decision in your mind that you wanted to help the next person. That lies right at the heart. And I think that is a really powerful message. And I love your values exercise, those 30 values, and helping to establish solid team foundations, because that is so true, isn't it? One of the things that frustrates us all as leaders in new teams, possibly this is the storming phase, is when other people on that team take it differently, react differently, account for their work differently, answer their emails differently to you, to your expectations. And that creates a lot of frustration amongst early leaders in team formation. And yeah, it'd be great to put that in COT. And I do encourage thinking along those lines. The challenge, however, is the intellectual bandwidth of our members and their desire to get training done in under 2 hours on a Zoom call. And yes, we have to be innovative about supplemental training to get around that a little bit. And like you say, it depends on where you're leading them to, what you want to get out of it. A few other things I've just picked up quickly in this vote of thanks: the trust environment and how that underpins risk-taking and innovation. I think that is such a crucial yet overlooked aspect. So what is the trust environment like within our clubs and our districts, and in these turbulent times of change, these turbulent times of opportunity, have we done what we needed to do to silence the sting of criticism, to enable innovation to flourish? And that was really a powerful open question for the district as a whole to think and reflect on. I don't think we'll ever completely silence everyone's inner critic, but we can at least create the climate in which they can start to win that battle for themselves. It's absolutely fantastic. And yes, I'll take your tip about having a mentor that is of contrasting personality that you can have a rant to, and then you can see that in fact that what you're reacting to can be seen completely differently through different eyes, and that you need a shift of perspective yourself. That's really good. Yeah, loads of notes, fantastic. So I'd really like to thank Elizabeth Jordan for spearheading our district webinars and for arranging Morag to visit today. And I do appreciate Morag's time, it's precious and scarce. None of this would be possible without a Zoom crew. And looking down the participants list, there's Gerald, Deirdre Gleeson, Jenny Chalmers, Chatsu Burnett, MC Gail Cliento, Time Liz Welch, backup Nick Collins. Have I missed anyone? Fellow members of the DLT, of course. And above all, the final bit of thanks I really want to give is to my whole district, District 71, and our district director, Gerald Moniks, for giving me the privilege to thank you for tonight's talk, Morag. Thank you. Handing back to the MC.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Morag, and thank you all our distinguished friends. And it's time now to finish our Sunday webinars, and I wish you all a fantastic Sunday.
Oh, we seem to have lost Gaia, so I'll finish the sentence for her. I wish you a fantastic evening. Thanks for coming. Huge thanks, Morag. You're back.
Was that okay? Bye. Ciao. Thank you, bellissimi.
Thanks,
Grazie.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye.